on rural areas in the United States, how their communities are adapting, and what their concerns and needs are looking ahead. U.S. rural economies were the hardest hit by the 2008 recession, and many have not been fully included in the recovery. As of 2017, average rural unemployment was still 2% lower than in 2007. Small businesses were hit especially hard. In the first 4 years of the recovery, counties with populations under 100,000 people lost 17,500 businesses, while economies in counties over 1 million people added 99,000 businesses. The coronavirus is potentially deja vu. The shutdown of commerce has already put small businesses, a key driver of rural economies, scrambling to survive. In particular, almost twice as many rural areas rely primarily on the recreation industry as urban areas. The total disruption of discretionary spending, domestic and international travel, and tourism is an existential threat to these communities. But so is the coronavirus itself, whether it has arrived yet or not. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our panel today and have them tell you a little bit about their communities and their experiences. Todd, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me, Tracy?
Yes.
Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about Withville. Withville is a small town of 8,200 residents. Interstates 81 and 77 intersect in our county. We are a traditional small town with a newly revitalized downtown with essentially a public investment on that front end of $4+ million infrastructure revitalization project. We are quickly becoming a tourist destination and that one-off experience that folks are looking for when they travel. So that's a little bit about Withville.
And Withville's in Virginia?
That's correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
And Lindsay, how about you?
Hi, I'm Lindsay Dotson, and I'm located in Charlevoix, Michigan, which is on the northwest portion of the Lower Peninsula, right on Lake Michigan. It is a town of about 2,500 people year round, but our economy is heavily reliant on seasonal tourism related to our waterfronts. And we have a few historic neighborhoods that have been in the same generations for a long time, of people that travel from areas like Chicago and St. Louis to escape the heat in the summer. So we're very much a resort community and very picturesque, but just a very popular spot for tourism. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is to strengthen our downtown so that it can be more fruitful year round, essentially.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. So Todd and Lindsay lead Main Street organizations that are focused on the economic vitality and well-being of customer-facing storefront businesses along the commercial corridors at the center of their communities. Matt, can you tell us about yourself, your organization, and a little bit more about what Main Streets are?
Sure. So thanks, Tracy, and thanks, Brookings, for hosting this important topic and focusing on rural issues. So yeah, I am the Vice President, Revitalization Programs at the National Main Street Center. We're a 40-year-old organization. We're a subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and really dedicated to the revitalization of downtowns and urban neighborhood commercial districts all across the U.S. We're really a cohort group of about 1,600 folks like Lindsay and Todd that really make up the fabric of downtowns all across the country. About 85% of our network, in fact, are rural communities, and really speak to the need for sort of economic revitalization within these areas.
Thanks for that, Matt. Okay, so let's start by jumping into the time machine and going back to March, which may feel like it was a long time ago. Todd and Lindsay, could you each tell us a little bit about how the coronavirus has impacted your communities? Lindsay, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. So we in Michigan saw a shutdown of our state on March I believe 16th. And so, of course, many of our restaurants were able to kind of pivot their business model at that point and serve curbside pickup and takeout orders only. But a lot of course, retailers were forced to close, along with theaters and barbers. You know the story. It's pretty universal at this point. But with that came a lot of loss because of the fact that we are very dependent on a couple of months a year to make a lot of the income and the profits that come into our community. And many of our merchants were preparing for said busy season and had, huge orders of merchandise that they, couldn't get rid of, and had to kind of adjust payment structures with their vendors. And of course, rents you still had to be paid, and very few actually had a really vibrant online sale ability. And so that, a lot of people just weren't able to make money for a good 8 or 9 weeks. So we have actually already had some businesses close, unfortunately, but thankfully there are some assistance programs that have stepped up and helped others weather the storm a little bit.
Is the coronavirus itself present in your community?
So sorry, I didn't touch on that at all. We've been lucky in the sense that I think we've had less than 15 confirmed cases in our county. But that also is a little tricky because we do have a transient community that comes and goes. If someone was tested positive, that would actually count for their home versus their second residence. And so those numbers might not be completely accurate, but according to our health department, we've had very few cases.
And do you feel that your health department's on top of it, and that you understand the situation? Todd, what about in your community?
I'll echo what Lindsay said. I mean, we're going through the same things. That's the thing about Main Street, is we're all kind of going through the same issues with our downtowns. But we were on record pace. I mean, this was our year. Our organization's 5 years old, so we have been developing. And we were on record pace for sales, lodging, meals tax this year, and everybody was looking forward to 2020 summer. And all of a sudden we got hit. So it's been a drastic change. Like Lindsay said, everybody's had to pivot, essentially change their business models to how they do business. And we have as an organization as well. So it's been a challenge for our organization. I mean, like I said, we're only 5 years old. And in that 5 years, we've undergone complete water line infrastructure project in our downtown that hugely impacted business. And then 2 years later, we did the full streetscape revitalization project, which again, totally impacted our businesses. And now we're at the pandemic. So we've always kind of been a resilient bunch here. And it's going to be no different with this situation. So we're going to look to rise above again and essentially rebuild to a certain extent, or get back to at least a new normal and what that might look like. But, I can't say enough about our partnership with our local government and other partners. I mean, everybody in our community is kind of on the same page with moving forward collectively and making this work for everyone moving forward. But it's a challenge for sure.
And Matt, I know that you're speaking with communities throughout your network in terms of thousands of small rural towns across the United States. What are you hearing from your network about how coronavirus is impacting small towns in rural America?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of consistent themes that stretch across rural America, especially with small mom and pop businesses. I think first is really just understanding safety guidelines. We're starting to reopen, obviously, in all 50 states around the country. Some of those were a little bit, earlier than later. And many small businesses are just trying to better understand not only how they keep their customers safe, but also their own employees and themselves. And so while you can have a proclamation to reopen, certainly what we're hearing is it's not always that easy. Business models, as Todd alluded to, are shifting, and trying to better understand sort of the stickiness of those shifts, to delivery pickup, internet service, and the ability to have sales channels online. We're hearing that that's been very problematic for many small businesses in rural America, because for the most part, many didn't have e-commerce capacity or opportunities that they were exploring. So this is a real big need for them, again, as they seek to pivot in a reopen recovery situation.
But Matt, in terms of health and safety, is there not guidance for small businesses about how to safely reopen?
Yeah, I think, on the federal side, there's been sort of very generic guidelines, and what we've seen to be very effective for, especially mom and pop businesses, has actually been the industry associations. I think they've really stepped up to the plate to assist, their members, their sector, areas. You think about from restaurants to hair salon associations, both at the state and the national level, fitness center, all different sectors have really stepped up to apply more specific guidelines that I think have been helpful. So organizations like ourselves and others have really just tried to agglomerate those resources, and then Main Street programs at the local level serving as the connectors to those small business owners.
Todd and Lindsay, can you guys tell us anything about how implementing new health and safety procedures has gone with your small businesses? I'm just trying to imagine, a small business that has a micro business with fewer than 10 employees, reading a ton of documentation and guidance. It just sounds like yet another burden in the middle of a crisis. Are folks struggling, or has it been possible to get these new health and safety standards and practices in place?
Well, I'll say that from our standpoint, we just opened phase 2, which allows 50% indoors for businesses. But we've got to remember that a lot of these storefronts are very, very small. So the social distancing is a challenge when there's so many people in a store, and 50% capacity for some of these folks can mean 5 people. And kind of policing that is a challenge when you have most of these small businesses run on tight margins anyway, and they have very few employees. So that's been a challenge. Even though everybody's excited to open, we made our community understand that respect these businesses as they try to open slowly, because just because the governor says that doesn't mean everybody locally is ready to do that. So we've been kind of the liaison to kind of put that message out there, although we want to see people open, and we have our outdoor spaces open as well, which is a nice thing. But these businesses got to open when they're ready, and they got to do things on their own terms for safety precautions for their customers.
I hear what you're saying. Lindsay, what about in Charlevoix?
Some similar comments off of Todd, but one of the things, especially with dining establishments or even just bars, it's policing the 50% or 25% capacity, depending on what type of business you are, sometimes requires additional staff, and then you're only serving half of the customers that you normally would anyway. And so you're not really looking at an actual profit of being open. So a lot of businesses are having to weigh a lot of those metrics and kind of decide for themselves if it's even worth the effort, which is really interesting. It's definitely a new way of approaching a business model. But yeah, the other part of it is just getting your hands on, necessary equipment like, masks and hand sanitizer and things like that. I'm sure it's been happening in a lot of places, but in Michigan, we have a lot of distilleries, and thankfully, those people have, again, pivoted their business model into producing hand sanitizer. And we've been lucky enough to be able to tap into large purchases of things like that, so that everyone can get their hands on some for their customers and their employees. And so, yeah, we also have to have, a plan. Like, everyone has to have a plan for how they're protecting their employees and their customers, and to have, Michigan Retailers Association put together kind of a template, but then, that's additional work for the businesses to have to do while they're scurrying to figure out how to function in our new reality. So there have been some bumps, but I think collectively we've been doing as well as we can with all of it.
I hear you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Pure Michigan hand sanitizer available at independent Michigan retailers. I'd like to learn a little bit more about your community's coronavirus response in the early days. We're hearing a lot about how small businesses were impacted by having to shut down. What kind of relief has been available to these small businesses? Todd, what have small businesses been leaning on in your community?
So when all this first happened, in essentially at the end of March, a lot of these organizations and businesses were looking to our organization. So what is our response? So that was a situation that we were like, oh gosh, so we got to figure out what the response is going to be. So we were actively researching and trying to figure out what this means, because in our community, I mean, people are seeing what's going on in the bigger cities and things. And a lot of the mindset here was, oh, it'll never make it here. We won't have to worry about it. And lo and behold, here we are. So we were pretty hugely impacted by it. And so our organization created what we called Support Local Safely campaign. And we took all the information that we could gather, took the time to research that information and put it together in one consistent area. So people didn't have to go searching all over the place for what's this loan mean, or do I qualify for this? Or so we put that on our website, and then we collectively made a website with some other local partners to share that one-stop shop for information. And that was very beneficial for the businesses, because again, they were trying to switch their models, trying to figure out, can I be open? Do I need to shut down? When does that need to happen? So this information that we could collectively get them in a one-stop shop method was very beneficial to them. So again, they were looking to us, and we had to respond like Main Streets usually do. So we were putting things together, and we were researching all these grant opportunities, because it would essentially be irresponsible for us just to pass on information of this grant without knowing the details and how it impacts people, because we don't want one of our small businesses signing up for something that they think is a grant, which is really a loan they may have to pay back later. So the education part of it, for us to learn about these programs on our own, and then try to help our small business community essentially teach them and walk them through steps. Luckily, we had a lot of really good banking partners that we were able to lean on for the PPP and the EIDL loans, that we could kind of turn them to some of our partners there. And they were able to answer the big questions about who qualifies for what, because the last thing we would want to do is set somebody up for something, and then 2 years down the road, they come back to us and said, well, you told me this was forgivable, or this and that. So with the liability on our banking partners, we felt more comfortable in having them do that. And luckily, we had those partners at the table.
And Todd, let's translate that for our audience a little bit. Sounds like you looked at a lot of different kinds of programs.
Right.
The PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program,
Correct.
Which was a federal program that was part of the CARES Act. And then what was that other program you mentioned? The
EIDL loan, EIDL, emergency. You'll have to help me with that one, Lindsay or Matt.
The emergency impact disaster loans.
Disaster loan.
Emergency impact disaster loans, and those were administered by the federal U.S. Federal Small Business Administration.
That's correct.
Okay, so Todd, I'm really interested in the research that you did, and the work that you did with your bank partners and with the small businesses you're trying to serve. Which forms of all these forms of relief, which resonated the most, and which seemed the most useful to your stakeholders?
So in the beginning, the EIDL loan was the easiest to get, or which we thought was going to be the easiest. It was the less strings attached, less paperwork involved, emergency loan of up to $10,000 in the beginning, what we thought. They later bumped that down to $2,000 per employee. So what we thought was the easiest one to get ended up being, you don't get as much money in the long run. But the PPP, that was a challenge too in the beginning, because the money ran out so quick. And by the time they got to the small towns and the smaller businesses, they were out of money. So that was a challenge. During the first round, none of our small businesses got the PPP funding.
Not one.
Not one. So that was very frustrating to them and to us as well. When the second
Lindsay,
round,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Todd. You were saying? No,
it's just when the second round of PPP funding came out, we had some businesses that were able to obtain that funding. But the first round was a little bit of a nightmare, really, to be honest with you, for the true small businesses.
And Lindsay, what about in your community?
Yeah, we right when everything started, we actually sent out I overburdened our business owners with surveys, but I was really in the mode of capturing data that we could use to really understand the scope of the issue that we were dealing with. And yeah, we had a really amazing local bank that worked with a lot of our business owners that already had an account with them. But those who are dealing with other banks in the area didn't have the success rate with applying for some of these programs as they did with one of our local banks. And so most of the people that I've gotten information from, really, they got like the $2,000 from the EIDL funding, and maybe $4,000 from paycheck protection. And especially because we have businesses that, are seasonal and have seasonal staff, it wasn't necessarily beneficial in the way that the program was meant to be beneficial, because some of those staff people weren't on. They changed the guidelines so much that eventually you could look back at more historical information to provide documentation of what your payroll might look like during the busy season. But at first that wasn't an option. So there were definitely a lot of obstacles. And even just with the systems in general, kicking people out, not being able to apply just because it was overburdened with the obvious need that was out there. And then couple that with possible slow internet connection in rural America, right? And it was probably, it kept some people up at night for sure.
So some structural issues in terms of the design of the program to serve seasonal businesses, and infrastructure issues, both in terms of internet connectivity and in terms of finance, in terms of the critical importance of having access to a local bank. Matt, what can you tell us about what relief was most useful to the small businesses throughout the Main Street network in rural America?
Yeah, so sort of two comments. One aligning with Lindsay and Todd's, anecdotes from their own communities. This was consistent all across rural America, where there were far less businesses being successful in applying, especially for PPP. Certainly in that early round, as we all know, and it got better in the second round. And our national survey demonstrated that there was more success at that point, but still much lower than urban counterparts. And I think a lot of that has to do essentially with some of the infrastructure changes in banking that really has pulled away from rural America, where it's on the commercial lending and commercial banking areas. So consolidations that have pulled back to more regional centers of doing that business. And as we know with PPP, that relationship was really critical as a component of that. On the flip side, and I think one that's been very positive throughout Main Street communities across the US, is really trying to localize the support on the financial side. And so while the federal support, great, state support, great as well, what we found was many programs looking from within, whether that was through community foundations, crowdfunding tools, local governments in partnerships with Main Streets, setting up like low interest loan pools or smaller grants to assist with recovery. I think that just speaks to the heart that you see throughout rural America, that they also look from within.
And interestingly, to the ability of Main Street organizations like the ones that Lindsay and Todd run to, be jacks of all trades in trying to create capacity where it's needed to build these bridges and relationships to make sure that these small businesses aren't left behind. So,
sorry, Tracy.
Oh, sorry, Matt. You go ahead.
No, I was just going to just comment real quickly. I think one of the sort of value propositions of leaders like Lindsay and Todd in these communities is that small businesses, not only do they need sort of these programmatic efforts, but they need connectivity, connections to them. They need education about them. They need people to convene around certain issues. And that's a really critical role that you find that folks like Main Street programs, Lindsay and Todd, fulfill in rural America.
Yeah, can you paint a little bit more of the picture of what are the institutions that play a role in economic development in rural America?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Certainly, Main Street programs we feel are a really important connector. They have partners like Chamber of Commerce's, tourism and visitors bureaus, county or local economic development corporations. And I think what we've seen over time is that all of those sort of central players are figuring out that it's not about competition for those resources. It's really about an alignment of resources. It's about bringing capacity and know-how to those particular communities. And so, and as such, they all play a very strategic role in moving those economies forward.
Lindsay and Todd, I see you guys nodding. I think we could really benefit from learning a little bit more about what's under the hood of your organizations. Can you tell us how your organizations are funded and who your partners are? Lindsay, let's start with you.
Okay. So in Michigan, we still have what we call DDAs, Downtown Development Authorities. And so we are housed within one, which is essentially here, it's kind of a city department, but we actually have a separate fund of tax dollars that we use for most of our income. But we do own some properties, so we have some rental income, and we do have a levy on our downtown district. But most of that is kind of earmarked for projects that we've implemented years ago that we're still paying the debt off for. And so all of our other programming, whether it's summer concerts in the park, restaurant week, and things like that, we primarily have to do fundraising for. And so we have a lot of community partners that step up and assist with some of that. We have a really good working relationship, as Matt mentioned, with our Chamber of Commerce, the city in general, our CVB, and even our area schools, and our downtown businesses. Even though we're here to help them, they're always the ones that step up to the plate to sponsor a concert and things like that. So, and as an example of fundraising that's had to be done lately, because Matt mentioned this, because our tax revenue is very restricted in how it can be spent, we were unable to create a grant fund with that money because it's just not. That's not the way the law is written. So we had to go to the community essentially, and we did create a crowdfunding campaign to start raising dollars for communities or a business support fund. And thankfully, we've had a lot of success with that. And our community foundation is stepping up to the plate and contributing to that as well. So even though we have, a lot of income that comes from tax dollars, most of our extra programming is funded through other means. So,
and Todd, what about in your community, in your organization?
Yeah, a little bit of a similar situation to what Lindsay was saying. Our organization is a little bit unique, and we have a really, really good partnership with our local government. So they predominantly fund us to a level of about 75 or 80%, and the rest is done through contributions, individual campaigns, fundraising, corporate sponsors, events, revenue, and things like that is really how we operate. But, the partnership, and I see this all through main streets throughout the country, it's the partnership with the local government that can be really the most important one to you if you solicit that partnership properly. Because all main streets to a certain extent have fundraising and dollars hung over their head to essentially operate. So on top of everything else that we do as an organization, to have to worry about all the fundraising campaigns and all that stuff can really drag you down. And I think Lindsay would agree, but it's a unique partnership that we have with our local government where they trust us to do a job that we work as a liaison between the property and business owner to the local government, which is a very, very strong partnership that we have. And it's a very business-friendly community is what has come out of it thus far, because if there's an issue on the ground level, we take that issue and we handle it if we can, but if we can't, we go straight to local government and we find solutions. We create incentives and initiatives that help small business. So there's always an ear to the ground, and there's always open communication from the business property owner standpoint straight to the local government. So everybody knows what's going on, and the communication is key with that. So that's a big thing for us. And kind of to allude what Lindsay was talking about, some of the grant funding, we created a 2020, what we call a 2020 fund. And it was a 0% interest loan program that we were able to solicit funds and work with our state agency in Virginia Main Street they ask us, what do you need as directors? What do you need to impact your community? So I was able to put a program together and basically pitch it to them. And we were able to get some grant funding in which we matched with our local chamber of commerce and our local joint industrial development authority. All of a sudden, we've got this pool of money that can impact not just downtown, but community wide. So that started at the state agency that we were able to solicit those funds, and they were willing to work with us and hear our ideas out. So I can't say enough about the Virginia Main Street program and everything they do and work with us and listen to our ideas. So that was a successful program, and we continue to build on that. So yeah.
That's a testimonial for Virginia. Lindsay, what can you tell us about the role of state funding in your work? And for both of you, what about federal funding?
So the MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, is where Michigan Main Street lives, in the same department as the Pure Michigan campaign. So they essentially, we don't get direct funding from them. Instead, we get services that are awarded to us, and all of which have been extremely valuable. But they have recently really kind of focused in on how they can assist small businesses, whether they're startups or looking to expand. And so they have launched a program called Match on Main, which has been incredible. I can't say enough about it, where businesses are actually, Main Street programs can apply on behalf of a business for funding up to $25,000 for operating expenses. And it's a grant. And so we were lucky enough to be able to bring some of that money into our community for a new business that opened last year. And it's definitely, I mean, opening a business, people sometimes definitely don't realize how much capital you need up front to do it well. And especially in a town like ours where you are seasonal. And so you might have to ride out a long period without actual profit before you're feeling good about your decision of opening a business. And so those types of programs are definitely helpful in the world that we live in. And they've actually changed that program now where they're making the dollars available to communities on behalf of multiple businesses. And we should be hearing any minute now on whether or not we got some of that funding to support our businesses for COVID relief efforts. So they really have been focusing on small businesses, and it's wonderful. I'd rather see the money go to them, to our program. So I think it's great.
That's outstanding. That was a great story. Thanks, Lindsay. And Matt, what have you heard as you speak to communities nationwide about the role of state and federal funding?
Yeah, I think on the federal side, what we're seeing that's extremely helpful from a support perspective, as we move beyond the PPP and that sort of thing, was also maybe not as highlighted as much in the CARES Act, but the funding that went to small business development centers across the U.S. There's about $265 million that was sort of channeled out. And, the small business development centers are those that do provide a lot of the one-on-one counseling and technical assistance and have historically been great partners with Main Streets across the country. We think there's a real opportunity to, help connect, facilitate those sort of resources in rural America. Noting that, if you think about just in terms of geography, there's only about 1,100 small business development centers across the U.S. It's a lot of territory to cover, and the need is great. So I think having extended partners like Main Street's chambers, local economic development corporations will be sort of key to the rollout of that extra funding for TA. And then on the state level, I think it's a little bit of kind of wait and see, whether or not there's another stimulus package. I think the states really had to focus initially through this period on, the fundamentals of public health and healthcare and certainly unemployment, at 40 million plus. And so, as we think about stages of rollout, certainly economic development, local community development is the next realm. And we certainly think that a spotlight on mom and pop Main Street kinds of businesses and the organizations that assist them is paramount to recovery.
Okay, and on the topic of recovery, Lindsay and Todd, one thing I heard both of you already mention is that the reality is that a lot of your existing small businesses are going to have to reinvent themselves, not just to cope during this period, but potentially for the much longer term. What kinds of outcomes for your businesses are you thinking about? What is that reinvention going to look like, and how will you know if it's working? Lindsay, can we start with you?
Sure. Sorry, we're like waiting, like who's going to go first? So we've already seen a lot of people taking the time off that they had to take advantage of trying to get online. So entering into that realm of either online sales or online ordering if you're a restaurant, because these are just services that they hadn't had. There wasn't an urgent need to do that in order to survive. And so I would say that we've seen a lot of people that have moved forward with those types of initiatives, but there are still others who might not be able to financially. And so that's a limitation where it's kind of like we've been catapulted forward into the world of modern technology and commerce. But still, it's not that easy to just create a website where you can sell things. And so definitely trying to channel some educational opportunities and funding opportunities to move some of those initiatives forward for people who are unable to because of the impact of COVID-19.
So potentially some momentum to close the e-commerce divide.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Todd, is that what's happening in your community?
Yeah, e-commerce and online sales and things like that are becoming a huge point for people. We're seeing that the businesses that had those platforms during this situation have been much more successful. So that's been a positive thing, and we're trying to educate our business community and some of our older business owners about what that looks like and try to teach them how to do so. I mean, some of our businesses don't even have a social media presence, and we all know that's everything for a small business, but so we're trying to be that organization that helps them reinvent themselves, because we're the boots on the ground. So we're trying to make sure that our business remains sustainable, and we keep the ones that we currently have and we don't lose any. But also we need to pivot ourselves to be able to reinvent the wheel a little bit on what business recruitment and economic development looks like for Main Street in the future. What kind of businesses do we want to look to target and recruit? And how are we going to pitch that to them now? Because we have some good incentives in place, but we can creatively figure out some other pitches to these folks that will essentially, hopefully, close the deal and help us get more business, but keep the ones we currently have in our minds and sustainable for the foreseeable future is kind of our approach. And organizations kind of taking a look at the next 2 or 3 years of what that might look like for our organization to connect those dots and kind of be that catalyst for information for our businesses, that they can come to us and trust us that we're going to have. If we don't have the information as staff and a board, we're going to make sure we have the partners at the table that can help these people, because the last thing we want to do is tell somebody, well, I'm not sure, or things of that nature. We need to have the answers, and we're going to make sure that we do that moving forward.
Yeah. And Matt, the stereotype about an organization that evolved from the National Trust for Historic Preservation might be that y'all look to the past for successful models. But as you look to the future and you talk to Main Street organizations around the country, what do you think rural Main Street America is going to look like in 3 to 5 years?
Wow, that's a big question, Tracy. I think, but an important one, especially as we look at the recovery. I think the most significant thing, and certainly it's embedded, as you mentioned, in our background from an organization, but the place remains important. I don't think that changes it all. People are concerned about their communities. We looked at our second round of surveys, and we asked small businesses about how their local communities responded just by using one word. And it was amazing how they thought about their local communities in terms of the support, the togetherness, that really helped to move them through. And I don't think that goes away in this particular situation. I think it's only enhanced. And so place will continue to matter. The work of and the need for small business activity as a bedrock of communities remains so important. And as we think about, new opportunities moving forward, reflecting on what things like remote work bring to rural economies, and the potential for new talent coming to communities, the rise in entrepreneurship that we typically see after high unemployment and recessions. I think there's a lot of opportunities on the horizon, and many, if we can overcome some of the technology hurdles is talked about before, can relate to rural economies.
But I've heard people say that investing in small businesses is like pouring money into a leaky bucket, and that, these are, high risk endeavors, and that, in a world of finite resources, maybe that's not where we should focus our recovery efforts. Lindsay and Todd, can you guys help us understand a little bit more? Why are small businesses so important to rural areas, and why do y'all put so much effort into them?
Yeah. Go ahead, Lindsay.
In Michigan, especially in our region of Northwest Michigan, which is, again, heavily supported by tourism, our largest employers in the region are small businesses. We do have manufacturing, and we do have other, of course, hospitals and schools. But if you look at the numbers, you have the most jobs created by small businesses. And so that's why they're the job creators. They're the backbones of our communities. And so, obviously all those other things have to be there to make a community. But if small businesses weren't supported the way they are, and if people didn't take those high risks, investing into a place that they love. Because if you talk to an entrepreneur, most of the time they realize that they're taking that risk, and they're doing it for the community that they live in or want to live in, not necessarily because they want to get rich, right? So it's more about, it's less about the bottom line and more about the place when it comes to small business, I think.
Yeah. I would echo everything that Lindsay said, and it's what makes your community unique. It's what builds tourism. It's what makes people want to come to your community. It's what, our local hospital, when they bring new doctors, and our corporate people, when they bring new people to locate in our community, they bring them downtown. And what does it say about your downtown if you have nothing there? It's in blighted condition. That's the heart of your community. So if you don't have that thriving and vibrant, then that right there says everything about that town that you want to know. So when we travel, when I go places, we do downtowns because the experience factor. I don't want to do the same old thing that I can do in any community. So that's where downtowns thrive, is they create that experience that I think more and more people are going to be looking for in this pre-COVID or post-COVID situation. They're going to be looking for these one-off experiences and get away from the masses of people. And I really think that's where downtowns can thrive moving forward.
Certainly, and the growth of the experience economy is a pre-pandemic trend that there's no reason to think that will disappear and go away, and every reason to think that it may become more dominant as a trend because of the pandemic in the long term. Matt, did you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, just a couple quick things speaking off of Todd's comments, because he really speaks to competitive advantage of small towns and small businesses in the Amazon world, right? How do you compete? And that experience, that uniqueness is definitely part of that value proposition. I want to ask to look at year-over-year sales in March of a group like Etsy, which is an e-commerce business, but they're for the artisans, the makers. They were up 47% from March of last year to this, compared to this March. And so I think it just speaks to people's yearning for that. And as doors become open, I think that the experiential economy is really important for small towns and small businesses. And then finally is the necessities. I mean, I think you can't overlook that if you're a small, rural community out in like Wyoming or Montana, and a business closed, that might mean you have to drive literally 2 hours or 3 hours to get something that you need. Your son or daughter's homework assignment, or a project that you're working on. They fill an important need for the basic necessities of people throughout the country.
I hear what you're saying. Okay, I'd like to just pause for a moment and let everyone who's tuning in know that we would love to hear from you. We want to hear your questions, which you can email to events, that's events plural, @brookings.edu, or you can tweet @Brookings Metro using the hashtag COVID in rural areas. That's hashtag COVID in rural areas. Tune in your questions so that we can involve you in the conversation. While we round up some questions from folks, I have just one image that I'd like to share with everyone. This is a map of coronavirus cases per capita in the United States as of April 14th, 2020. So what we're looking at here is really the first month of the pandemic. So just to be clear for everyone, this map's quite out of date to today. But the reason why I show this map is because we see that in the early weeks of the pandemic, that rural winter recreation and vacation destinations were major coronavirus hotspots on a per capita basis. That's what we're seeing in Blaine County in Idaho and in the ski counties of Colorado. So I'd like to ask Lindsay and Todd, your communities are summer recreation destinations that are places to escape the heat and enjoy mountains or water. Are you concerned about the possibility of summer outbreaks of coronavirus in your community? And do you feel your community is prepared for this possibility? Lindsay?
Yeah, our health department, I've had weekly meetings with a couple of health officials and other partners in town, and they're certainly concerned, especially because we do have a lot of people that are coming from larger cities and out of state and just downstate in the Detroit area that are visiting the area and not necessarily bringing their germs with them, but the potential is there, right? And so there's definitely a heightened sense of worry when it comes to the possibility. And also, relating that to general human behavior and what we're observing now that things are opening up. All of our small businesses have been pretty diligent about requiring masks inside stores, but there are people that are just not really interested in doing that. And that, raises some flags too, and makes you hope that nothing bad happens and we don't, have a spike in cases here. But, if the virus continues to circulate the way it has been, then it might not be great.
Hope may be insufficient.
Right. And thankfully we do have a hospital, but in northern Michigan, we've had some hospitals that are dubbed dirty and clean. Our hospital has been clean, meaning no COVID patients or, people that have been exposed are going to that hospital. And I can't speak to the plans on whether or not, cases if they were to rise, what the response would be. But I'm hoping, and I'm pretty confident in our health system that they have a plan, just kind of waiting in case it's needed. But yeah, our closest hospital that does take COVID patients is about an hour drive, maybe an hour and a half. So it's interesting. Hopefully we just,
this could be tough.
Yeah. Hopefully things will be okay though.
And Todd, what about in your community?
Yeah, it's a real concern. I mean, we've canceled a lot of our big time events that are revenue generators, and we had a huge July 4th event that we had to cancel with fireworks associated, even though we're at the phase 2 and will likely still be at phase 2. There's still a huge concern, because the last thing we would want to do as an organization is put our community in jeopardy by inviting the masses of people to an event, even though maybe we could maintain a distance factor, but that's so hard when you do mass scale events. So we unfortunately had to cancel that event because of that reasoning. We have other events, and later on in the year, September, October, that we're still, it's in the back of our mind again. There's not a cure. So, and with the 50% that the governor has mandated in phase 2, we've actually seen our cases go up here locally. So that's a concern as well. And as long as that continues to trend upward here like that's a scary situation, because we don't want to put our community in jeopardy by inviting people out or doing certain situations that would encourage people to come out, risking that we could have an outbreak here, because we've seen certain outbreaks around the region and the state have happened, and we definitely don't want to be known for that. So it's a real concern, and we're kind of trying to play it by ear, keep up with all the mandates, all the phases and what they mean, and work with our small businesses to educate them on what all of this means to them. So it's a real concern for our organization and our community and our hospital moving forward.
Todd, does your community have access to testing?
We do now, but in the beginning, that was a real situation, because we didn't know. Obviously people have it, but you just don't have the access to testing, so you don't truly know who has it. And that was the initial panic in the beginning was kind of crazy when everything was happening, and then the panic kind of wore off as the cases went up, and some people were taking it seriously and some people weren't taking it seriously. And it's like, if you didn't have it, it's like people were against each other for having a mask and not having a mask, and it was quite a situation to be a part of. And it's just the diversity between people just not agreeing on what you should do and how you should protect yourself was quite an issue here locally. And some people still don't take it seriously, but others do. So it's interesting, like Lindsay said, for sure.
So there's ongoing confusion about exactly what precautions are most necessary and most effective in order to inhibit the spread of the coronavirus.
I would say yes to that question. I mean, people know what they need to be doing. You're taught what you should do through the governor and everything, but it's people not doing it, and then people not policing people not doing it. So that's a little bit of the issue.
The whole community is not together on it.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Yeah, and then with enforcement, even some local law enforcement agencies, or even county or state, with a lot, depending on where you are, some of the mandates haven't been interpreted as law that can be enforced, and so it's not. No one really knows who to turn to when you have someone who's not abiding by the mandate rules and the recommendations for being in public. And so, yeah, and I wouldn't say there's confusion, because like Todd said, people know, we know, so, keep your distance and wear a mask and all that fun stuff. But it's more of a, I think it's just personal choice that people are just like, you know what, I don't believe that that's going to help me. And there's definitely a lot of that going on in rural America.
And people are so divided with that choice of what to do and what not to do. It's not really a good situation.
I hear what you're saying, and there's no consensus that these are precautions that we engage in order to not just keep ourselves, but to keep the community safe.
Right. And when I say policing, I want to be clear. I don't mean our actual police station going out and telling people they should. I just mean from a personal health standpoint. Yeah. It's just like, do what you should be doing. And then when others don't do what they should be doing, that attracts other people to kind of get lax with it. And then all of a sudden we have a situation where there's 50 people hanging out, and, I don't know. It's weird.
And if there's anything that America has learned in the last 2 weeks, it's that I hope we've learned that the precautions required to inhibit the spread of coronavirus should not be a law enforcement responsibility, right, but rather our need to be a community responsibility, something that we all do in order to keep each other safe. And so it is important that we all be aware that that this is still a divisive issue, and that the consensus that we need to stay safe is not out there. That is hard to hear, but I think that it's very important to hear. Matt, did you want to join in on that?
No, I think what Lindsay and Todd have spoken to is what we hear all
It's
across the
real.
country. It's for real. It's exactly right. So there's a community side of it and there's a respect side to it.
Okay, I'd like to bring forward a question from Will Ross of Tendo, who sent this on Twitter. Lindsay and Todd, you both have mentioned issues with internet connectivity. And certainly COVID-19 has revealed a digital divide across the country. We hear about that in the context of education, right? School and distance learning. But how is the internet connectivity in your towns? And is there anything that needs to be done about it?
I live 6 miles outside of our downtown, and that is considered the country if you ask people in town. And I can't get internet. So,
you do not have internet in your home?
No. It's either satellite or we use a hotspot. So we're using, cellular data to connect to the internet. And so
your access is through your phone.
Yep. And that is, not everywhere in Charlevoix. There are, in town, the broadband is a thing, but it's limited. But because of students being out of school, the library actually promoted people using the parking lot so they could use the Wi-Fi from the library to get homework done and things like that. So yeah, we're out in the sticks when it comes to being connected in that realm for sure.
Yeah.
And Todd, what about in your community?
I don't think it's quite as severe as Lindsay was mentioning. But we obviously we have issues, but our internet is we have one provider, maybe two at the most. But again, we have connectivity in our downtown. We have redundant fiber in our downtown area and throughout. So we definitely have the opportunity to expand on it. But people likely in the country here will tell you that the internet is not the best. I mean, they can get internet, but the speed quality and the uploading speed of the internet is definitely not good. But I had a similar situation to Lindsay when we first moved about 5 miles out of town. We couldn't get internet, and we had to do the hotspot route. And luckily, there was a grant for rural internet connectivity that luckily just went through our location, and now we're able to get pretty fast internet.
And was that federal?
That I'll have to look back on that. I'm not sure. One of our local farmers actually solicited that, and he allowed them to come across his property to do this, but I'm not exactly sure which grant that was, but it was something for rural internet connectivity. And we were able to tap into that, which was a game changer for us. If we didn't have that, we'd still be on a hotspot, I guess.
Matt, are there structural barriers to improving connectivity in rural areas? What's the state of play here, and what's the policy solution?
Yeah, well, I think it's that we're treating rural cell and internet connectivity as a business demand issue, a market issue. And what it really needs to be about is an infrastructure policy issue. Much like we funded interstate highways in 1956 all through the country, we have to think in the same domain like water and sewer and electricity, that these are fundamental foundational infrastructure that is necessary throughout the US. And until we can come together as a country and get behind that kind of investment strategy, the business market side of it, that is just not, it's a supply and demand issue. There's not enough there. Right.
So, these communities can't market themselves as the, remote work paradises, until the infrastructure is in place.
Hey, Tracy, I believe it was a USDA grant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Todd. That's fascinating.
Yeah, we do. Well, moving on. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we are coming up on time. So I just want to be respectful of the fact that we're about to hit 3 p.m. And I would just like to conclude by thanking all of our participants and everyone who tuned in online to listen to this conversation today. I'd like to end by just asking Lindsay, Todd, and Matt, as you do the important work that you do in communities, what gives you hope? Lindsay, let's start with you.
What gives me hope? The people. Small towns are just so connected and supportive of one another. and it's inspiring. Just, I'm not from the town that I work in. I only moved here 3.5 years ago, and I'm still very much moved and inspired by what everyone does for each other in this community. It's great.
And Todd, what about you?
Yeah, I would say, moving forward, a sense of community. I mean, we will rise together. We've been through a lot together. And we had a hashtag that we created about a year ago. It was "Together We Are Better." And it never rings so true right now as we move forward with our local government, with our small businesses, property owners, everybody on the same page to collectively move forward in a positive fashion. I think when you have that, it's very powerful. And all those people at the table, I really feel like you can achieve anything as a community, and I feel sure that we're going to do that. So,
Thanks, Todd. Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of this. I'm humbled every time I talk to Main Street directors all across the country. They are the most like the tireless leaders throughout the country, working in these communities, bringing their stakeholders together. They're the most innovative, creative, entrepreneurial folks you'll find. And so that really lends, I think, to the spirit and the hopefulness through the recovery and onward.
Thank you. Yes, thank you all. I have to say that I've learned some important lessons today, but I also have cause for hope. And I look forward to continuing this conversation and looking for ways that policy can support your work. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.